I had spent weeks preparing for Christmas, imagining warmth, laughter, and a fleeting hope that Mom would finally see me as her daughter. The smell of roasted turkey filled the air, cinnamon and pine tangled in the living room, and I carried a small gift, my hands trembling, my heart beating fast. Mom's smile was wide, her eyes sharp, the kind of smile that hides knives behind the teeth. She took one look at me and said clearly, with that cold certainty I knew all too well, "You're off the will." The words hung in the air like glass breaking. Every joy I had imagined, every hope I had clung to, shattered in an instant. My siblings glanced at me with forced politeness, my father avoided my gaze, and the twinkling Christmas lights suddenly felt like tiny spotlights on my humiliation. I felt a flicker of disbelief, then silent fury, then a rush of clarity. I would not be the girl who cried in a corner. I would not be the daughter whose heart was stepped on and forgotten. I clenched the gift in my hand and made a vow silently, a vow that would be my quiet, unstoppable revenge. "Where are you watching from?" I whispered to myself, imagining the audience beyond this story. "You won't believe what I did next." My name is Emily Carter. I am 28, and I spent my entire life trying to earn Mom's approval, always the quiet, polite daughter, always waiting for love that was conditional and fleeting. My siblings were shielded from rules, privileges stacked in their favor, while I learned that compliance and silence were my only survival tools. Mom, Margaret Carter, has always been the queen of appearances. Beautiful, sharp-tongued, and perfectly composed, she wore generosity like a costume. While in private she calculated, manipulated, and ensured I was never first in her eyes. The holidays, birthdays, even small victories were always for show, and I was left to watch, silent, invisible. This Christmas, I had hoped for a change, a hint that her heart had softened. Instead, I was handed the ultimate rejection, the knowledge that she had removed me from the will, that my life, my inheritance, my standing in the family had been dismissed in a single cruel sentence. And that is when I realized the gift I held was not for her approval or her acceptance. It was my chance to rewrite the story, to claim my power, and to ensure that she would never forget the daughter she tried to erase. I never imagined that a holiday meant for joy and warmth could turn into a battlefield. The smell of roasted turkey, cinnamon, and pine filled the room, wrapping around the sound of laughter and clinking glasses, but I felt like an intruder in a house I had grown up in. I had spent hours preparing for this night, baking cookies that looked perfect, arranging the living room so that it sparkled under the soft glow of fairy lights, and even buying a gift that I had thought my mother would truly appreciate. Every detail had been meticulously planned because I wanted this Christmas to be different. I wanted to feel included, to feel love, to feel like I belonged in my family's world for once. The moment we sat at the table, I tried to push aside the nerves. My children were excited, their eyes shining with anticipation for the food and the gifts, completely oblivious to the tension that had been simmering between my mother and me for months. My husband, unaware of the storm about to hit, smiled politely and encouraged the kids to pass the mashed potatoes. I could feel my heart beating faster, a mixture of hope and dread, because I had been told many times in the past that family gatherings with Mom were never simple. There was always a way for her to assert control, a way to remind me that I was, in her eyes, lesser than her other children, lesser than her grandchildren, and certainly lesser than the image she projected to the world. The dinner began quietly enough, small talk floating through the room like smoke from the fireplace. My mother's laughter, practiced and soft, echoed through the dining room as she spoke with my sister, who sat beside her, smirking in that way that only someone who knew they were completely untouchable could. I forced a smile, trying to keep the holiday spirit alive for my children, passing the cranberry sauce with a careful hand, pretending not to feel the weight of the stares from the other family members. Then it happened. My mother, in her typical dramatic fashion, leaned back in her chair and smiled at me, that cruel, slow smile that I had come to recognize as the precursor to humiliation. She picked up her wine glass and took a deliberate sip, her eyes never leaving mine, and then she said it. The words hit me harder than any slap, harder than any argument we had ever had in private. "You are off the will," she said, her voice calm, almost serene, as if she were delivering the most ordinary news in the world. The fork I was holding slipped from my fingers, clattering against my plate. I felt the cold weight of disbelief settle in my chest. My children looked up at me with innocent curiosity, sensing the tension but not understanding why my face had turned pale. My husband opened his mouth, likely to defend me, but hesitated, unsure how to navigate the sudden storm that had descended over the table. The room went silent. Every eye was on me, and I could feel the weight of judgment, envy, and secret amusement pressing down from every corner. I tried to speak, but my throat felt like sandpaper. Words refused to form. I felt the familiar sting of being invisible, of being dismissed, of being deemed unworthy by someone who claimed to love me. My mother's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. She had orchestrated this moment with precision, relishing the power she wielded. My sister's laughter, barely restrained, floated over the table like poison, a reminder that I was alone in this humiliation. My mind raced. I thought of every sacrifice I had made for this family, every time I had put their needs above my own, every holiday, every birthday, every achievement I had celebrated quietly while they boasted of their own accomplishments. How many times had I given my time, my energy, and my love, only to be told, either implicitly or explicitly, that I was not enough? And here, on what was supposed to be a night of family unity, my mother chose to strike again. I looked around the room, trying to find an ally, a sympathetic face, but there was none. My father, distant and silent, avoided my gaze, perhaps out of habit, perhaps out of fear of my mother's wrath. My cousins, seated across the table, exchanged uncomfortable glances, unsure whether to laugh with my mother or pity me. The children's eyes filled with confusion and unease. I swallowed hard, keeping my voice steady as I told them to eat, to enjoy the meal, while a fire of fury burned quietly in my chest. I could feel the first sting of tears, but I refused to let them fall. I had spent too many years crying in secret, too many years hiding my pain so that others would feel comfortable in their world of privilege and control. Not tonight. Tonight I would remember every moment of this humiliation, every word, every glance, every calculated move by my mother to assert her dominance. I would remember it not with sorrow, but with clarity. I would remember it as the starting point of something else, something far greater than her petty cruelty. My children reached for the food, and I placed the dishes in front of them, smiling through gritted teeth. I spoke gently, as though nothing had happened, though every fiber of my being screamed with injustice. I watched as they ate, and I silently promised myself that no child of mine would ever feel the sting of being secondary in their own family. No one would ever make them wait for scraps, for recognition, for love that should have been given freely. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of polite conversation, forced laughter, and veiled jabs from my mother. She leaned in to tell my sister how proud she was, how generous she had been, while I sat, invisible but attentive. I listened. I memorized every gesture, every phrase, every moment that revealed their character and their weaknesses. This was not just dinner. This was a map. This was an education in human behavior, in strategy, in survival. I reached for the gift I had prepared for my mother, wrapped neatly in shiny paper with a bow that glimmered under the chandelier light. I held it tightly, feeling its weight, not because of what was inside, but because of what it represented. It represented my presence, my voice, my refusal to be erased from this family. I could give it to her as a gesture of goodwill, as a reminder of civility, or I could let it serve as the first move in a game that she would not understand until much later. As the night drew on and the family began to exchange gifts, I smiled politely, handing over the presents that others had given me. When my turn came, I lifted my own gift and offered it to my mother, maintaining eye contact, holding steady as she smirked and raised her eyebrows. She accepted it with a perfunctory smile, completely unaware that the real gift was not what was inside the box, but the intention and the plan that had already begun in my mind. The room buzzed with music, laughter, and the clatter of dishes, but I felt a strange calm settling over me. For the first time, I understood that humiliation was only power if I allowed it to be. The power she wielded tonight was temporary, fleeting. My own power, born of observation, patience, and determination, was only beginning to take shape. I would not be the person who wept quietly in a corner, waiting for scraps of recognition. I would not be the person who silently endured their cruelty without consequence. That night, as I tucked my children into bed, I whispered a promise to myself. I would turn every insult, every slight, every moment of being dismissed into a force that would change the game. I would show them that being left out, being ignored, being told I was unworthy, was not the end of my story. It was the beginning. And I would make sure that when the story unfolded, they would remember exactly who had been underestimated, exactly who had been dismissed, and exactly who had been wronged. So I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the soft hum of the city outside my window filling the silence. I could still hear the echoes of the dinner, the laughter that had once crushed me, the faces that had turned away. I could still feel the fire in my chest, a quiet fury that would not be extinguished. And in that moment, I vowed to myself that my next Christmas, my next family gathering, and every gathering after that, would not follow the same script. I would write my own script, one where I was no longer invisible, one where I was no longer powerless, one where I would claim what was rightfully mine, not just in inheritance, but in respect, in dignity, and in love. I picked up the gift again and held it close, imagining the moment when I would finally reveal what it truly represented. A smile crept across my face, not of malice, but of quiet triumph. I knew then, with absolute certainty, that this was only the first move in a game that my mother would never see coming. I sat at the table as if nothing had happened, smiling when appropriate, passing dishes with practiced grace, while inside my chest a furnace burned slowly and without sound. The room hummed with holiday music and small talk, yet every word that left my mother's mouth felt like a deliberate cut, a measured effort to remind me where she believed I belonged. My sister laughed at something trivial, her hand resting lightly on my mother's arm, an easy show of affection that had always been rewarded in our family. I did not answer her jokes. I let them hang in the air, letting the sound show everyone that I could be present and composed at the same time. I watched the faces around the table, cataloguing expressions the way a naturalist might catalogue birds. My father smiled with practiced neutrality, his eyes flicking toward my mother for a cue before he joined in her mirth. My brother shifted in his seat, a slight tightening around his mouth that told me he was enjoying the scene but also uneasy about its sharpness. Cousins and aunts exchanged glances that were equal parts curiosity and discomfort. Children played with paper crowns and ribbons, unaware for the moment of the tension under the tablecloth. I observed every micro-expression, every blink, every pause, because humiliation loses power when it is named and mapped. My mind began to work in a slow and steady way, like a machine learning from small inputs. I catalogued times when my mother liked to control a room, the particular tone she used when she intended to wound, the gestures she made to draw attention to herself and away from anyone else. I noted my sister's tell, that brief upward tilt of the chin when she was fishing for sympathy or applause. I studied my father's avoidance, how he would not look directly at me when he participated in the cruelty. Each pattern became a data point, something I could use later to predict and shape responses. Anger rose in me in waves, but I bottled it and turned it into calculation. Fury is loud and visible, and in our family loudness had always been punished or dismissed. Quiet persistence changes systems over time. I decided then that my revenge would not be a scene, it would be a series of precise moves. I let the table be my classroom, every insult my homework, every mocking smile a clue to their vulnerabilities. I resolved that I would act, but not with raw reactivity. I would act with intention, and that intention would be invisible at first, then undeniable. When someone passed the gravy, my hand moved the way it always had, steady and calm. I engaged in small talk with relatives who had always been polite but distant, asking about nieces and nephews, inquiring about their jobs, listening to details that in the past I might have missed. Now I filed each piece of information away. Where did they bank? Who did they trust for legal matters? Who had a soft spot for my mother that could be appealed to? Who had a grudge that might be useful later? I felt like a cartographer tracing a map that would lead me back to my dignity. My children watched me closely. Maya glanced up, then looked away, uncertain whether to meet my eyes. Leo fiddled with his napkin, his small fingers knotting and unknotting as if he were trying to work out the geometry of the offense. I kept my expressions neutral for them, showing only warmth and calm, but I wanted them to see that their mother was not crushed. I wanted them to know that anger without purpose was not the lesson I would teach them. Instead, I wanted them to learn how to stand, how to take notes, how to plan without losing their humanity. After dessert, I excused myself to the kitchen, carrying a tray of plates, letting the cool air of the hallway wash over my face. In the quiet of the kitchen, I let out the breath I had been holding. I leaned against the counter, feeling the solidness of stone under my palm, and allowed myself a moment to name the feelings. Hurt, yes. Betrayal, of course. But beneath those, an astonishing clarity. When someone strips you of status publicly, you are handed a mirror. You can see how they choose to define you. You can decide whether to accept their definition. I decided then that I would not accept it. I busied myself with washing dishes, allowing the rhythm of running water and the friction of a sponge to center me. Each plate rinsed, each cup scrubbed, was a small act of control. When I returned to the dining room, I carried a clean glass and a folded napkin, the normal holder mask of domestic life intact. My family saw me as they always did, competent in household tasks, compliant in social rituals. They did not suspect that in the quiet of the kitchen I had turned their words into fuel. That night, as people lingered with coffee and conversation, I walked through the rooms more than once, greeting guests, laughing at small jokes, appearing ordinary. This ordinariness concealed a mind working, planning like a patient craftsman. I believed in slow work, in building pressure until the structure could no longer hold. My mother's cruelty was a brittle material. When pressure is applied steadily in the right places, even brittle things break. I spent the following days in a similar mode, calm on the surface, deliberate underneath. I did not shout. I did not threaten. I made small adjustments in how I presented myself. I dressed with a quiet elegance that did not beg attention, but that could not be mistaken for weakness. I answered questions with clarity, returning direct eye contact when spoken to, refusing to let my posture collapse into the old habit of making myself small. I practiced short phrases that conveyed boundaries without apology. I did not lecture the family. I simply acted as though my worth was evident through the way I moved through the world. At work, I became methodical about notes and records. When my mother sent a text with an insult veiled as a joke, I saved it. When my sister made a public jab on social media, I took a screenshot. I began to arm myself with documentation. Humiliation is easier to erase when it exists as feeling alone. When you pair the feeling with paper or pixels, with names and dates, it becomes a public artifact. I plan to use those artifacts later, not for spectacle, but for clarity and leverage. I also started listening more closely to others in the family, focusing on how they framed their complaints and their loyalties. I asked gentle questions that seemed casual at the time, but were actually reconnaissance. Who had been closest to my father in his final years? Who had influence over certain trustees and friends? Which family member owed favors that could be called in? I was not being petty. I was gathering the tools necessary to repair the damage done by cruelty and neglect. There were moments when the old scripts tried to pull me back. A cousin asked if I was upset, attempting sympathy that was wrapped in gossip. I smiled at the moment, thanked them for their concern, and steered the conversation to safer ground. It felt strange at first to hold back the natural urge to confront. But I reminded myself that confrontation without structure is like swinging a hammer at a locked door, inefficient and noisy. Strategy is the locksmith. Strategy opens doors quietly, and then everyone sees what is on the other side. At night I wrote lists. Not of grievances alone, but of objectives. Objective 1, establish boundaries around family gatherings. Objective 2, ensure my children are always seated in a place of dignity. Objective 3, cultivate allies outside the immediate circle. Objective 4, document incidents to prevent gaslighting. Objective 5, plan a move that would remind my mother that cruelty has consequences. The list felt steadying. Each item filled me with possibility rather than despair. I also began to care for myself in small, practical ways. I went for early morning walks before the house woke. I ate deliberately, choosing foods that made my body feel steady. I read books about negotiation and about the psychology of power, not to run away from my feelings, but to understand how to turn emotion into durable action. My internal life felt like a new project, one where the materials were attention, discipline, and moral clarity. My children watched me through this transformation with an intuitive sense of safety returning. They noticed how I held my shoulders differently, how my voice no longer dropped when I addressed an elder, how I looked into people's eyes without shrinking. They copied these movements without knowing the theory behind them. This is one of the most important parts of my planning. Power passed down is not about domination. It is about teaching young people how to claim the space they deserve without stealing it from others. Friends reached out quietly, some surprised that I had tolerated so much for so long, others ready to offer practical support. I accepted offers with gratitude, and I declined those that smacked of pity. Pity can be a cage dressed as compassion, and I did not want my liberation framed as a spectacle. I wanted it to be a restoration. I wanted each step to feel like a steady brick laid to rebuild a foundation. As the weeks moved on, my silence became a kind of steady pressure. Family rituals continued, but they carried new optics. Guests who had once laughed with my mother now watched more closely. My mother attempted another cutting comment at a small gathering, but this time she met a different face. I responded with a quiet question about the remark, a neutral tone that required explanation rather than encouraging the performance she wanted. She faltered. When cruelty requires an audience to feel powerful, depriving it of that audience erodes its force. I did not celebrate that evening. I did not gloat when she stumbled. I simply filed the moment as proof that method and patience work together. I moved my pieces carefully, adjusting to resistance and using it to test the strength of the structure I was building. Every misstep she made, every self-gratifying jab, was another piece of data. I added it to my list, and I moved forward. There is a kind of silence that is not submission. It is a silence that accumulates in tension. I had turned my humiliation into a quiet workshop, a place where I could fashion a new reality, where revenge was not about breaking people but about reclaiming a life that had been defined by someone else for too long. I had plans, allies, documents, and above all, a steady will. The fury that had once threatened to destroy me was now a guiding light. I sat in my car in the cold night air, the driveway light casting a small pool of gold on the pavement, the gift resting on the passenger seat like a quiet promise. The box was simple, wrapped in paper I had chosen because it looked like something someone would give without expecting anything in return. I had folded the corners carefully, tied a neat bow, because appearances mattered in this house, and tonight appearance would be part of the plan. I held the wheel and breathed, tasting the metallic edge of fear and the sweeter flavor of resolve. All afternoon I had been building something small and lethal in its intent, a thing that would look like kindness but carry with it the weight of truth. The velvet of the ribbon was soft under my fingertips, a contrast to the hard nerve under my ribs that would not be silenced. I thought back to every word my mother had spoken earlier, the casual cruelty of the phrase she had used so calmly at the table. "You are off the will," she had said, and the air had snapped like glass. That sentence had been meant to remind me of my place, to assert control and to humiliate. I had accepted humiliation often enough in my life, but not tonight. Not when my children were watching. The gift had 3 parts, each chosen with care. On top I had placed a small, handcrafted ornament, something like a trinket that would sit on her tree and be admired by guests. It was pretty and harmless, the sort of thing she would like because it looked expensive without being expensive, a thing she could display and name as proof of her social grace. Beneath the ornament I had tucked a letter in neat handwriting, a letter that read like gratitude and love, a performance of filial devotion. That letter would make her smile, it would make her hand feel warm, it would soften the moment and lower her guard. I knew her well enough to know how much she loved being thanked, how much she thrived on being seen as generous and magnanimous. The third thing, the heart of the plan, I had hidden beneath tissue paper at the very bottom of the box. It was small enough to fit in an envelope, but heavy with consequence. It was a set of documents and a folder of evidence that I had begun collecting in the weeks before Christmas, a small arsenal assembled quietly, piece by piece. I had copied old letters my father had written, notes he had left about fairness and responsibility, receipts and emails that showed the ways my mother and my sister had manipulated situations to their advantage. I had saved texts, I had taken photographs of neglected promises, I had printed the small cruel messages my mother sent disguised as jokes. Each page was a thread in a web I had spent months untangling. I had learned to gather proof the way other people learn to cook a meal. First the raw ingredients, then the patient simmering, then the careful plating. I had learned where to find things, how to ask questions that sounded casual, how to collect records without alarming anyone. I had reached out to old friends of my father, people who remembered his principles and who resented the way my mother had rewritten his legacy for the comfort of her favorites. They had been cautious at first, then helpful, then insistently kind as they handed me their memories and their files. One woman gave me a small ledger that had been tucked away in a desk, another sent scanned emails that had been deleted from a shared account. A neighbor quietly told me about a promise my father had made to me in private that my mother had scoffed at. Each contribution had been a small victory, each piece a nail in a coffin they had built for my dignity. I had prepared the box so that when she opened it she would feel a flicker of benevolence, then curiosity, then perhaps pride. The ornament would catch her eye, the letter would soften her heart, and only then would her hand drift to the bottom. That was when she would find the folder. I did not expect her to burst into tears. I did not expect public repentance. I expected, and hoped for, a moment that would be recorded in the memory of the family. I expected discomfort, shifting eyes, the small shifting of posture that admission forces in people who are accustomed to being untouchable. I wanted to start a chain reaction, one quiet and unavoidable, the kind that forces the family to confront what they had allowed to happen. Driving up the path to her front door, I rehearsed my face, the mild tilt of concern, the soft hand on her arm when I greeted her. I would play the part of the loving daughter, the one who wanted reconciliation. I had found that anger shouted in the wrong place simply gets dismissed as melodrama. Anger that arrives folded carefully inside a box often does a better job. When I knocked, the door opened almost immediately, her smile in place, the perfume she wore like a shield. She welcomed me with that practiced warmth that made guests feel honored and made me feel like an outsider. I balanced the box in both hands and stepped across the threshold into a room that had always been polished to perfection. She took the package with an air of curiosity, her fingers smoothing the paper as she untied the bow, savoring the ritual. I watched her face as she opened the top and found the ornament and then the letter. For a moment she looked softened, pleased, then suddenly pleased with a private pride, as if the world had affirmed her role as a perfect mother even as she had just humiliated me at the table. I felt the familiar ripple of anger and turned it into focus. I stayed where I was, smiling, allowing the scene to play out exactly as I had planned. When she reached the bottom of the box and saw the folder, her smile faltered, a small crease appearing at the corner of her mouth. She lifted the papers with a look that was half curiosity and half calculation. I watched her hands tremble very slightly as she fanned the documents, and I saw that old mirror of insecurity cross her face. For a second she evaluated the audience, but there was no audience other than me and the cat crossing the rug. So she closed the folder and looked at me, that smile gone now, replaced by that rare animal caution that reveals itself when someone has been surprised in ways they never anticipated. She said nothing at first, which was exactly what I wanted. The silence was a drumbeat that filled the room, loud in its own smallness. She cleared her throat and tried to laugh, but it came out thin. She asked me what it was, attempting to steer away from vulnerability by playing ignorance. I told her the truth in a voice that stayed steady and even. I told her these were documents I had found in the weeks leading up to Christmas, things that did not look accidental, things that suggested patterns. I did not shout. I did not accuse. I simply named the facts, and the quietness of my voice made the facts heavier in the air. Then I watched her decide. She could toss the papers into a drawer and call me ungrateful. She could pretend it was nonsense and continue to rule the room. Or she could answer the small questions these papers asked and do something like a human would do when faced with evidence against her chosen narrative. I had no appetite for theatrics. I wanted to plant seeds. I wanted to make sure these seeds would grow into a garden where truth could not be buried. I let her squirm. I let the moment stretch, until she finally asked, with a voice that was too bright, what I planned to do with them. My answer was simple and deliberate. I told her I had brought the box because I wanted to talk, because I wanted to be honest about how the dinner had felt, and because I wanted her to know there was another way to be a mother, a way that did not involve using power as punishment. I said it like a daughter, not an avenger. I let the tenderness of the words hang in the air so people who might later listen would remember that I had offered reconciliation first. Then I said something I had never said before. I told her I was not interested in being part of a will that was governed by cruelty, and that if love was conditional, I would build a life that did not depend on her approval. I watched her eyes flicker with an emotion that looked suspiciously like fear. As I left her house that night, I walked slower than I had driven in. The box was empty now, the ribbon untied, the ornament perched on the shelf where she had placed it like a small trophy. I felt light and heavy at the same time. The gift had not been dramatic in the moment. There had been no raised voices, no crying, no public humiliation for her. But the folder in her drawer changed things, because it created a private truth she could not easily diffuse. The act of giving had been an act of claiming. I had given her what she prized, a token of gratitude, and beneath it I had left proof that the story she told herself about our family was not the only story. That night when I tucked my children into bed, I felt the old steel of my resolve settle into place. The present in my hands had been a small thing, a domestic ritual, but in its quiet bones it carried a lever. I had chosen a tool that fit the lock I needed to open. I had turned humiliation inward and made it into agency. I had handed my mother a mirror with paper and ink, and I trusted that mirrors, even when polished carefully, eventually force people to see. "Where are you watching from?" I asked the darkness as I turned the lock on my own door. "You will not believe how this small gift set the next moves into motion." I sit at the kitchen table, the remnants of dinner cooling in front of me. The warm scent of roasted meat and spices fills the air, a comfort to some, but to me it feels like another layer of oppression, another reminder of how carefully the world around me has been arranged to overlook my existence. My mother leans back in her chair, the corners of her mouth curling into that smug half-smile she has perfected over the years. My siblings chatter casually, tossing crumbs of conversation back and forth, laughing at jokes I do not understand. Or perhaps they are jokes meant to exclude me. I feel the heat rise in my chest, but I do not speak immediately. I have learned over the years that anger spoken too soon becomes fuel for mockery, for the kind of laughter that breaks your confidence without ever raising a hand. So I breathe, slowly, observing the way my mother lifts her glass and glances at me as if testing my loyalty, testing whether I will accept the invisible role she has assigned me. My siblings glance at me too, not openly hostile, but not inviting, their eyes a mixture of curiosity and superiority. Then my mother starts, her tone smooth and practiced. She laughs lightly, a sound meant to charm everyone else at the table, and says that I am too sensitive, that I should understand how the family operates. She reminds me, casually, that favoritism is natural, that some children simply excel, that they deserve more attention, more recognition. Every word is a carefully crafted knife, and I feel the old familiar sting of being made to feel smaller than I am. I notice how my siblings shift in their seats, emboldened by her words. They add examples, laughing over past occasions when my efforts were overlooked, when my contributions were minimized or ignored entirely. They do not see that I have been recording every moment in my memory, that every slight, every dismissive glance is a note in a ledger I keep silently. My hands rest on the table, my fingers tracing the grain of the wood. I feel my pulse quicken, but I stay calm. I speak slowly, deliberately, my voice soft but firm. I remind them that the people they claim deserve recognition are not the only ones who contribute, that achievements are not always loud or visible, and that loyalty and effort cannot be measured only by who receives applause. I see the flicker of surprise cross my mother's face, the slight narrowing of my siblings' eyes. This is new to them. They are accustomed to compliance, to me nodding and accepting my position in the hierarchy without question. I continue, citing small instances, subtle actions that have gone unnoticed, times when I have taken care of responsibilities without praise or attention. My words are not accusatory, not yet. They are observations, reminders, gentle but undeniable truths. I see my mother's smile falter, the practiced charm slipping, the confidence that has always been her armor showing cracks. My siblings exchange glances, uncertain now, unsure how to respond. I have planted seeds of doubt, and I can feel their unease. My voice strengthens as I notice the shift. I am no longer just the quiet observer, the invisible participant in family rituals designed to make me feel small. I am a presence that commands attention. I speak about fairness, about acknowledgement, about the need to treat all children with respect. I do not shout, I do not demand, I do not plead. I simply state the truth, clear and measured, and allow it to hang in the air, heavy and unavoidable. For the first time in a long time, I feel the balance tipping. The room feels smaller, the laughter less certain. My mother tries to redirect the conversation, to laugh off my words, to charm the guests or anyone listening into believing that nothing has changed. But I do not move, I do not flinch. My siblings fidget, the smallest hints of discomfort appearing in their posture, in the way they avoid meeting my eyes. I notice one of my aunts, sitting quietly at the edge of the room, nodding subtly at me, a silent acknowledgement that she has seen it too. That small gesture fuels me, reminding me that I am not alone, that my observations, my words, my quiet insistence on fairness are noticed by more than just the people I challenge. As the conversation continues, my mother attempts another wave of control, pointing out past mistakes, moments where I supposedly failed, times when my siblings had forgiven me. She tries to paint me as overreacting, sensitive, unable to accept family dynamics. I counter gently, calmly, naming moments of true neglect, of favoritism, of unfair treatment, laying them out not as accusations but as factual observations. I can see her mind working, trying to figure out how to regain dominance, how to twist the narrative back in her favor. I am prepared for this, having rehearsed in my mind countless responses, anticipating every attempt to minimize my words. I do not let her derail me. I continue with clarity, speaking about the importance of equal recognition, about the right of every child to be valued, about how favoritism erodes trust and respect in a family. The tension in the room becomes almost tangible. My siblings sit frozen, caught between loyalty to my mother and the undeniable truth of what I am saying. I feel the old surge of fear, the risk of being ostracized, but it is outweighed by the steady flame of purpose growing inside me. I have learned that patience and careful articulation carry more weight than anger alone. Tonight, my words are my instrument, and I wield them carefully. I pause, letting the room absorb what I have said. The silence is potent, heavier than any insult or laughter could ever be. My mother exhales, a small flicker of resignation in her expression, though she does not admit it. My siblings shift, unsure how to respond, and I realize that I have begun a slow revolution at this table, one quiet statement at a time. I glance at my children, sitting quietly at the side, watching intently. Their eyes are wide, curious, and attentive. I feel the weight of my responsibility to them, to show them that dignity is not granted by birthright or favoritism, that respect must be demanded and upheld. I have begun, in this moment, to model what courage looks like, what standing up for oneself in the face of ingrained inequality feels like. By the end of the evening, the tension has not fully resolved, but the seeds of change have been planted. My mother retreats into silence more than before, my siblings are cautious, and the room feels a little different, a little lighter. I leave the table knowing that tonight was not about victory, not about public acknowledgement. It was about laying the foundation for what is coming next, quietly and deliberately, with patience and resolve. Have you ever been in a situation where speaking up seemed impossible, yet you found the courage to stand? Comment below, share your story, and remember, sometimes the quietest voices carry the heaviest weight of truth. I start the day with a quiet determination, waking up with the knowledge that I will no longer let my presence be ignored. The sunlight filters through the curtains of my room, gentle and warm, and I feel a small spark of hope flicker inside me. For so long, I had moved through the house as if invisible, a ghost among the living, performing tasks no one noticed and receiving thanks no one offered. But today is different. Today I will take small steps, tiny acts of assertion that will remind everyone that I exist, that my thoughts, my opinions, and my presence matter. At breakfast, I sit at the table with my children, placing their plates neatly in front of them, and I notice my mother glancing at me with her usual faintly smug smile. She expects compliance, silence, a quiet acknowledgement of the hierarchy she has spent years constructing. But I will not give her that satisfaction. I begin to ask questions about the day's schedule, about meals, about errands, about plans. My voice is calm, firm, not loud, but steady. My children watch me with wide eyes, their expressions a mix of surprise and admiration. For the first time, they see me not only as a parent but as a person who demands recognition, who takes up space with purpose and dignity. I notice the subtle shifts in my family members. My siblings exchange glances, uncomfortable with a small but unmistakable display of confidence. My mother's eyes flicker, a moment of hesitation, a crack in her composure. These small victories, barely noticeable to the untrained eye, are monumental to me. Each glance that falters, each hesitation that surfaces, is proof that I am no longer invisible, that my quiet insistence on being recognized is beginning to work. Throughout the day, I find more ways to assert myself. I volunteer to make decisions about family meals, planning activities in a way that subtly includes my children. I suggest minor changes to household routines, not out of defiance but out of practical consideration, showing competence and care. Each small decision is noticed, sometimes met with resistance, sometimes with acceptance. I take note of each reaction, filing them away for the future. Every acknowledgement, every begrudging nod is a reminder that I have the power to influence, that my voice carries weight. During the afternoon, I engage in conversation with relatives who have long overlooked me. I ask them about their lives, their experiences, their plans, demonstrating genuine interest. Some respond with warmth, others with skepticism, but all are reminded that I exist beyond the roles my family has assigned to me. My children watch closely, absorbing every interaction, learning the lessons of advocacy and self-respect by example. I feel a surge of pride as I see their eyes light up with understanding. In the evening, when my mother attempts her usual subtle manipulations, I respond calmly. She suggests that certain responsibilities belong only to her children, that my input is not needed, that my opinions are secondary. I do not argue angrily. I do not shout. I do not react with panic. Instead, I state my perspective clearly, pointing out how my suggestions contribute to the household, how my children benefit from my involvement, how fairness ensures harmony rather than division. My tone is deliberate, firm, unwavering. I can see the surprise in her expression, the tiny flicker of doubt in her eyes. My siblings pause, momentarily caught off guard, unsure how to respond. By nightfall, I have made several subtle moves that signal a change in the family dynamic. I have spoken up, acted decisively, and claimed small victories that my mother and siblings cannot fully ignore. These actions are not dramatic. They do not require confrontation or loud arguments. They are strategic, quiet, effective. They set the stage for the larger transformations I know will come. Each act of self-assertion strengthens my confidence, solidifies my resolve, and prepares me for the bigger challenges ahead. As I tuck my children into bed, I reflect on the day. I recognize that true change does not happen in grand gestures or public displays alone. It begins with small steps, persistent and intentional. I have planted the seeds of respect, fairness, and acknowledgement within the family circle, and with patience, they will grow. My children see it, my relatives see it, and slowly, my mother will see it. Have you ever felt overlooked by your own family? Have you ever had to fight for your voice in a place where you were expected to be silent? Comment below and share your story. Tell me how you reclaimed your space, your dignity, and your place in a world that sometimes refuses to notice the quiet strength within you. Remember, small victories build the foundation for lasting change. Every word spoken, every act of quiet courage, every step taken in confidence matters. They are the bricks that will pave the path to larger victories, the stepping stones that will lead to fairness, respect, and recognition. Take those steps, and let your presence be felt. I start the morning with a renewed sense of purpose, knowing that I cannot fight the battle alone. The unfairness my children endured and the disregard I faced from my parents and sister has not gone unnoticed by everyone. There are those among our extended family and our close friends who have quietly observed, who have felt the tension, who have seen the favoritism and the subtle cruelty. They are the allies I never expected, the voices of reason and support who are willing to help me navigate the treacherous waters of family politics. It begins with small gestures. A cousin stops by one afternoon, casually bringing coffee and a few words of encouragement. "I have noticed how they treat your children," she says softly, eyes wary of anyone overhearing. "You are patient, and you are strong. Do not let them diminish you." Her words, simple as they are, feel like a shield. I realize that strength is not only found in confrontation but also in knowing who stands behind you, who sees your struggle and validates your feelings. Through these quiet interactions, I gather information and guidance. An aunt shares stories of past family conflicts, explaining how she once faced similar issues and how she navigated them without creating a permanent rift. A close friend from school who is now a parent herself sends me notes and calls, reminding me of the importance of advocating for my children. Each conversation is a reinforcement, a reminder that the world outside my immediate family recognizes fairness and sees injustice for what it is. The moral support is invaluable. As I walk through the house, I feel less isolated. I am no longer the only one aware of the subtle hierarchy, the invisible rules that have kept me and my children at the margins. Their support reminds me that my instincts were correct all along, that my anger was justified, and that change is possible. With each tip, each story, each word of encouragement, my confidence grows. I begin to see patterns in my family's behavior, small cracks in their carefully maintained facade, weaknesses that can be gently exposed without causing unnecessary conflict. I also begin strategizing with these allies. We discuss ways to assert my children's needs without triggering defensiveness, ways to demonstrate fairness and logic rather than anger and accusation. We talk about timing, about observing rather than reacting, about making subtle changes that accumulate into undeniable shifts. Their perspective helps me see that small, deliberate actions can have a much greater impact than any dramatic confrontation. There are moments of doubt, of course. I worry that I might misread their intentions, that my reliance on these allies could backfire, that I might misstep and worsen the situation. But every supportive word, every quiet observation from someone outside the immediate conflict, reassures me. I am not alone in seeing the injustice, and I am not alone in acting to correct it. By evening, I feel a sense of solidarity I have not felt in years. My allies do not shout, they do not intervene directly, they do not create drama. Instead, they equip me with knowledge, perspective, and encouragement. They remind me that fairness is not about confrontation alone but about patience, strategy, and consistent demonstration of what is right. I reflect on the subtle power of quiet support. It is easy to underestimate how much a kind word, a shared observation, or a guiding tip can change the dynamics of a family. My allies remind me that I am justified in my feelings, capable in my actions, and not isolated in my struggle. Each day, I become more prepared, more resilient, and more confident in standing up for myself and my children. Have you ever had someone quietly support you in a moment when the world seemed against you? Comment below and share your story. Tell me about the friends, relatives, or strangers who reminded you of your own strength and guided you when you could not see the path forward. This chapter of my journey teaches me that allies do not have to be loud. Their presence, their advice, their quiet encouragement is a force that builds momentum. With their support, I can plan, observe, and act. I can assert myself and protect my children without creating unnecessary conflict. I can move toward fairness and recognition, one step at a time, confident that I am not alone. Every word of encouragement I receive, every tip I gather, every supportive gesture strengthens my resolve. It is not immediate justice, but it is the foundation upon which justice will be built. And as I go to bed that night, I feel a quiet hope, a recognition that the family dynamics are beginning to shift. I am not powerless. I have allies. I have strategy. I have my voice. And soon, I will reclaim the dignity and respect that has been long denied. The morning begins quietly, but I know that today is different. I have spent weeks observing, gathering allies, listening, and learning. I am no longer willing to sit silently while my children are treated as if their needs, their feelings, and their place in this family are secondary. I stand in front of the kitchen table, the same one where I have served meals, wiped spills, and endured subtle insults for years. Today, it will witness my voice, my stand, my courage. I take a deep breath, feeling the tension in my chest. My mother is arranging dishes, her smile polite but calculating. My siblings chatter casually, unaware of the storm building in me. My children look up at me nervously, sensing that something is about to change. I bend down and whisper to them, "Stay calm, stay close to me, we are going to make this right." They nod, eyes wide but trusting. That trust gives me strength. I speak, my voice steady but firm. "Mom, I need to talk to you and everyone else here about how my children and I have been treated. No more hiding, no more excuses." Their chatter stops. My mother freezes, the knife of surprise cutting across her face. My siblings glance at each other, a mix of irritation and disbelief flickering in their eyes. For the first time in years, I feel the shift in energy. I start with examples, specific moments that show the favoritism, the inequity, and the disregard. I recount the Christmas dinners, the birthday parties, the family gatherings where my children waited for crumbs while others were served first. I speak of the whispered comments, the dismissive gestures, the subtle signals that taught my children they were less important. Each word lands like a stone, silent but heavy, in the room. My mother opens her mouth to interrupt, but I do not let her. I continue, recounting the moments with clarity and calm, refusing to let emotion cloud the facts. I speak about my sacrifices, my attention to my children, the love and care that I have given while being pushed aside. I do not accuse, I state. I do not yell, I explain. I do not threaten, I assert. My siblings shift in their seats, unease spreading as they realize I am not attacking but revealing. My words pierce the veneer of their casual cruelty. I see the flicker of guilt, the twitch of awareness, the cracks forming in their composed faces. They are used to me being silent, to me shrinking, to me accepting my place. Today, that pattern is broken. My children watch me closely, their eyes reflecting pride and hope. They see their mother no longer bending, no longer apologizing for her existence. They see strength, resolve, and dignity. I feel their energy bolster my own, giving me courage to continue. Every sentence I speak is not just for me, but for them. Every truth revealed is a lesson in fairness and integrity. Mom finally interrupts, her voice sharp but uncertain. You are exaggerating. You think everything is about you. I shake my head, meeting her gaze steadily. No. This is about fairness. This is about recognizing that my children and I deserve the same respect as anyone else in this family. This is about accountability, about understanding that actions have consequences. The room is quiet now, tension thick. My siblings open their mouths to speak but quickly close them, realizing that words alone cannot erase the reality I have painted. I see the subtle acknowledgement in their expressions, the unspoken admission that they have been wrong. I do not gloat, I do not jeer. I simply stand firm, allowing the truth to speak for itself. As the confrontation unfolds, I notice small shifts. A cousin nods subtly in support. My aunt shifts her eyes away, reflecting regret. Even the children's presence seems to remind everyone that innocence and fairness cannot be ignored. The energy in the room changes, moving from resistance to reflection. The confrontation is not about humiliation but about revelation. By the time I finish speaking, I am exhausted but exhilarated. I have reclaimed my voice, my position, and my children's dignity. I have turned silence into strength and invisibility into visibility. I do not need apologies yet. I do not need validation. I have stated the truth and allowed it to exist in the open air, undeniable and irrefutable. To viewers watching this unfold, have you ever had to stand up for fairness in your own family? Have you ever found yourself the overlooked or undervalued one and summoned the courage to speak truth to those who dismissed you? Comment below and share your story. Let your voice be heard. This is a reminder that fairness is not optional, and standing up for it is not weakness but strength. The confrontation ends not with dramatic shouting or violence but with the quiet weight of truth. I feel the tension slowly dissipate, replaced by a sense of empowerment. My children look at me with admiration, my parents and siblings with uneasy acknowledgement. The room has shifted, and so have we. I take a deep breath and realize that this is only the beginning. Standing up once has given me clarity and courage, but consistency and persistence will continue to be key. I have sparked awareness, started dialogue, and established boundaries. The foundation for respect and equality has been laid, and I am determined to continue building upon it every day. In the silence that follows, I feel a calm resolve. This confrontation is not about anger or vengeance but about principle and protection. It is about asserting dignity and teaching my children that they are worthy, that fairness matters, and that courage can overcome years of neglect. The confrontation is a victory not in words alone but in the reclaiming of voice, presence, and agency. The lesson here is clear. Standing up does not require aggression, but it does require honesty, clarity, and commitment. It requires unwavering belief in your right to fairness and your responsibility to protect those you love. And as I leave the room that day, I know I have set a precedent, a standard that cannot be ignored. I have drawn a line in the sand, and the family knows it. Have you ever had to speak out when others tried to diminish you or those you care about? Comment below and share how you navigated the confrontation. Your experience can inspire others to find the courage to act, to assert fairness, and to stand firm when challenged. By the time the evening comes, I feel a sense of completion. Not of victory, not yet of reconciliation, but of assertion. I have done what I came to do. I have spoken. I have observed. I have protected. And in this moment, I understand the power of quiet, deliberate, and thoughtful confrontation. The ripple of change has begun, and my children and I are no longer passive observers. We are participants in shaping the respect, fairness, and dignity that we deserve. The morning sun filters through the kitchen window, catching dust particles and golden beams that feel almost like a spotlight on the small table where I sit with my children. I have collected months of evidence, small but undeniable, showing the consistent effort, care, and love I have poured into their lives. Every doctor's note, every school achievement, every bedtime story and missed social event becomes part of the quiet but powerful case I carry. I start presenting these details in conversations that feel casual but are anything but. I speak about my children's schedules, their medical needs, their emotional well-being. I remind the family subtly about holidays spent together, projects completed, achievements celebrated, all while being ignored or dismissed. Each story is a thread weaving a fabric of undeniable truth that cannot be torn apart. At first, my parents brush me off, their eyes shifting, uncomfortable but masked with indifference. My siblings make small jokes, thinking to undermine me, but I remain composed. I have learned patience. I have learned the power of timing. Each carefully chosen word, each calmly stated fact, lands like a seed. I do not shout. I do not accuse. I do not beg. I inform. I clarify. I demonstrate. My children sit beside me, quiet but observant. They know their mother is no longer silent, that the days of being secondary are ending. Their pride and trust in me give me energy. I notice their confidence growing as they see me stand firm, as they witness that fairness is not only a word but a practiced principle. They begin to speak up in small ways too, pointing out overlooked accomplishments or gently reminding relatives of forgotten responsibilities. As days pass, the family dynamics begin to shift subtly. Cousins who once ignored my children now ask questions, offer small praise, and include them in conversations. Aunts and uncles who used to remain neutral now nod at my observations, acknowledging the truth without confrontation. The atmosphere begins to change, the quiet recognition spreading like sunlight through darkened rooms. I continue documenting my children's needs and my sacrifices, but now I also include examples of how small acts of fairness, respect, and inclusion improve everyone's experience. I show that acknowledging their value does not diminish anyone else but uplifts the family collectively. Slowly, the idea that my children deserve consideration becomes undeniable. There are moments when my mother attempts to interject, a sharp comment, a subtle dismissal, but I handle each with calm authority. I redirect the conversation, gently but firmly, to the facts, the evidence, the observable truth. The more I remain composed, the more her attempts at deflection falter. I realize that strength does not need volume or aggression, it requires consistency, clarity, and courage. I notice my siblings becoming cautious. They glance at each other, whisper quietly, and begin to measure their words. The casual superiority they once held over me and my children is fading. It is replaced by hesitation, curiosity, and the growing awareness that their previous behavior will no longer go unchallenged. In one quiet evening, I sit with my children, reviewing schoolwork and sharing stories of past holidays. They laugh and smile freely, without fear of being overlooked. I glance at them and feel the enormity of what has begun to shift. The turning point is not a single event but the accumulation of consistent truth, calm assertion, and the undeniable love I have demonstrated. Family gatherings now carry a different energy. Relatives who once ignored us now approach with polite interest. Conversations are inclusive rather than dismissive. My mother, though still wary, begins to listen more attentively, her tone softer, less dismissive. The hierarchy that once placed my children and me at the bottom is crumbling, replaced by respect earned, not demanded. At this point, I understand the power of observation and strategic patience. I see how consistent, Thoughtful actions can dismantle entrenched biases and change perceptions over time. I have not needed to yell, to fight, or to humiliate anyone. I have only needed to persist, to document, and to demonstrate the value of fairness through action. I pause to reflect on the lessons embedded in this transformation. Advocacy for my children requires not only courage but also wisdom. Patience becomes a tool, observation a weapon, and integrity the foundation upon which change can be built. I have learned that turning the tide does not always require confrontation. Sometimes, it requires steady persistence and the careful presentation of truth. The family begins to notice small victories. My children receive recognition for their achievements, whether in school projects, artistic endeavors, or sports. Cousins and relatives acknowledge them first, a subtle but profound shift that indicates respect is replacing old habits. My siblings' smug smiles falter as they realize the game has changed, that they can no longer dismiss or belittle us. For viewers watching this story, have you ever experienced a turning point where persistence and integrity began to shift unfair treatment in your own life or family? Share your experience in the comments below. Let others learn from the power of calm, consistent advocacy and the impact it has on changing perceptions and restoring dignity. By the end of this chapter, I realized that the turning point is not merely about being heard. It is about being seen, acknowledged, and respected for the truth and effort that one consistently demonstrates. The quiet victories and subtle changes are as significant as the large confrontations. They signal the shift from being overlooked to being valued, from being secondary to being essential. The journey is far from over, but the direction has changed. The respect and inclusion my children and I now receive are no longer fragile or fleeting. They are built upon demonstrated integrity, careful planning, and unwavering commitment to fairness. Each day reinforces the lesson that persistent truth cannot be ignored and that genuine care and sacrifice will always leave an imprint that eventually commands recognition. I finish the day knowing that this turning point is both a milestone and a foundation. It is proof that patience, strategic action, and love for my children are stronger than entrenched favoritism. The seeds I have planted through careful observation, documentation, and advocacy are beginning to bloom. Respect, acknowledgement, and fairness are taking root in ways that will endure. For everyone watching, remember that change often comes quietly. The subtle recognition of truth, the consistent assertion of dignity, and the deliberate demonstration of value can alter even the most entrenched family dynamics. Comment below if you have ever experienced a turning point where your persistence and courage began to shift unfair treatment. Your story can inspire others to continue standing up for what is right and for those who depend on you. The turning point is here. The family has begun to adjust. My children are no longer secondary. My voice is heard. And the respect we have long been denied is finally emerging. The evening air feels charged as we enter the large family gathering, a hall filled with familiar faces, murmurs, and carefully rehearsed smiles. My children cling to my hands, their small fingers warm and steady, reflecting the confidence they have gained over the past weeks. I can feel their excitement mixed with a quiet apprehension, as if they sense the significance of this night without fully understanding it. For so long, they were invisible, left to wait while others were celebrated. Tonight, everything begins to change. As we walk in, whispers ripple through the crowd. I notice glances that linger a moment too long, some filled with curiosity, others with a mix of confusion and disbelief. The atmosphere is electric, and I know my presence, alongside my children, has already started to shift the dynamics that were once so rigid. I keep my posture straight, my head high, projecting calm authority that contrasts sharply with the forced cheerfulness that often fills these gatherings. Mom spots us immediately. Her eyes widen slightly, just enough to betray surprise before she quickly masks it with a practiced smile. She had always believed she could control the narrative, dictate attention, and prioritize her chosen favorites. But the foundation of her smugness is beginning to crumble. I catch a flicker of unease in her expression, subtle but unmistakable. The realization that my children will no longer be relegated to the sidelines has begun to unsettle her. We make our way to the center of the gathering. I deliberately introduce my children to cousins, aunts, and uncles who once ignored them, highlighting their achievements, their growth, and the milestones they have reached. Each introduction is an act of reclamation, a public assertion of their worth and presence. I speak with quiet pride, letting my admiration for them shine through every word, every smile, every gentle gesture. The family responds differently than I anticipated. Where once there was indifference or subtle dismissal, now there is curiosity, a need to engage, to acknowledge, to include. My children beam under the attention, their confidence radiating outward, affecting everyone around them. They no longer shrink into corners or wait silently. They participate, answer questions, and even tell stories that elicit laughter and nods of approval. The shift is palpable, the power of recognition evident in every corner of the room. I watch my mother closely. She attempts to interject at moments, offering a forced comment or redirecting attention to her favorites. But her voice carries less weight now, drowned out by the natural flow of genuine admiration and acknowledgement that my children receive. The smugness that once defined her presence is fading, replaced by tentative observation. She sees, perhaps for the first time, that the balance of attention and respect is no longer within her control. The subtle cracks in family hierarchy continue to grow as the evening progresses. Cousins who previously ignored my children now seek their opinions. Aunts and uncles approach, offering compliments, asking questions, and engaging with genuine interest. The elders who once turned a blind eye now nod, acknowledging accomplishments and showing respect. Each interaction reinforces the shift from exclusion to recognition, from secondary status to rightful acknowledgement. At one point, I take a deep breath and step forward, calling my children to the front of the gathering. I speak to the room, briefly highlighting their achievements and the values I have instilled in them. The crowd responds with applause and smiles, genuine recognition that carries far more weight than forced attention or empty praise. My children's faces light up, their eyes reflecting pride, confidence, and the quiet satisfaction of finally being seen. I notice the reactions of my siblings. Their casual superiority has faltered. They exchange glances, whisper quietly, and measure their words. The dynamic that once allowed them to dismiss or overshadow my children no longer exists. The public acknowledgement has disrupted old patterns, and they are forced to adapt. The recognition of my children's worth is now undeniable, a reality that no one in the room can ignore. Throughout the evening, I remain composed, guiding my children with subtle cues, encouraging them to engage, speak, and share. I watch as they interact with relatives who once overlooked them, noticing the shift in behavior and the respect that follows. Each moment is a small victory, a confirmation that persistence, patience, and advocacy have tangible results. I reflect on the significance of this public recognition. It is not simply about pride or attention. It is about establishing a foundation of respect that will endure beyond this evening. My children have learned that their worth is inherent, that they deserve to be acknowledged and celebrated. I have learned that calm, consistent advocacy can overcome long-standing bias and favoritism, transforming not only the environment but the people within it. As the gathering begins to wind down, I notice subtle gestures of respect from those who once ignored or belittled my children. Conversations that previously excluded them now include them naturally. Compliments flow freely, and the room feels warmer, more inclusive. The power of recognition, when combined with persistence and integrity, has reshaped the family dynamic. For viewers watching this story, have you ever experienced a moment when public acknowledgement changed the way your family or peers treated you or your loved ones? Comment below and share your experience. Let others see how the quiet assertion of worth and recognition can shift long-standing patterns and bring about meaningful change. The evening concludes with my children standing proudly by my side, their laughter and smiles echoing through the room. I realize that the public recognition is not merely a fleeting moment. It is a milestone that validates their efforts, their achievements, and their rightful place within the family. This experience solidifies the lessons of patience, persistence, and strategic advocacy that have brought us to this turning point. Mom's smile has faltered completely now. She can no longer claim control over attention or affection in the room. The hierarchy that once allowed her to prioritize her favorites is gone. My children have claimed their rightful space, and I have guided them to this moment with care, determination, and love. By the end of the night, I understand that public recognition is a tool of empowerment. It validates, elevates, and reinforces the truth that every individual deserves respect and acknowledgement. The transformation I have witnessed tonight, both in my children and in the reactions of our family, is a testament to the enduring power of advocacy, patience, and steadfast belief in fairness. This is a story of persistence rewarded. A story of children learning their worth and a parent guiding them to recognition. It is proof that standing firm, advocating patiently, and seeking truth can alter the course of family dynamics in profound and lasting ways. For viewers, take a moment to reflect. How can you use recognition, advocacy, and calm persistence to transform your family or community? Share your stories and insights in the comments below. Your experiences can inspire others to stand firm, act with integrity, and guide those who depend on you toward acknowledgement and respect. Tonight, my children are no longer secondary. They are seen, heard, and celebrated. They are no longer overlooked. And the shift in our family dynamic marks a turning point that will endure for years to come. The air is calm now, a stark contrast to the tension and whispers that once filled every family gathering. I sit with my children, feeling their small hands in mine, the warmth a reminder of everything we have endured together. For years, they waited, watched, and learned that their needs were secondary, that their voices did not matter in the hierarchy of our home. But tonight, everything is different. Tonight, they are acknowledged first, celebrated, and included. I take a deep breath and let myself reflect on the journey that brought us here. Every small victory, every whispered conversation with supportive friends and relatives, every quiet act of standing my ground has led to this moment. I see now that patience, observation, and careful assertion of our worth can shift even the most ingrained family dynamics. I remember the humiliation at the table, the crumbs my children were forced to accept, and the silent fury I carried within me. That fury has transformed into a quiet strength, a force that guided us to this point. Watching my children laugh and interact with relatives who once ignored them fills me with a profound sense of pride. They are no longer invisible. Their confidence grows with each acknowledgement, each kind word, each subtle nod of respect from family members. I realize that recognition is not just about attention, it is about validation, empowerment, and the knowledge that they are seen and valued for who they are. I glance at my mother. Her smug smile has faded completely, replaced by confusion and tentative observation. She can no longer manipulate the flow of attention or dictate who matters most. The balance of power has shifted, not through anger or confrontation alone, but through strategic persistence, careful planning, and unwavering advocacy for my children. I feel a sense of justice, not in vengeance, but in the restoration of fairness and dignity. As I reflect, I also consider the lessons learned. Advocacy is not always loud. It can be subtle, persistent, and grounded in truth. Protection is not only about physical presence, but about creating spaces where children feel secure, valued, and respected. Patience is a tool of empowerment, allowing others to see the consequences of their actions and the power of consistent integrity. I have learned that change is possible even in the most rigid family structures, and that standing firm for those who depend on you can transform both hearts and behaviors. I hold my children close and whisper to them that they will never be marginalized again. Tonight was not just a victory for them, but for all of us who have fought quietly for justice and respect. I feel their gratitude in their eyes, their trust in my guidance, and the sense of security that comes from knowing they have an advocate who will always stand for them. To viewers, I ask this: have you ever felt the weight of being overlooked, the sting of unfair treatment, or the challenge of advocating for those who cannot speak for themselves? Comment below and share your experiences. Let us build a space where stories of persistence, advocacy, and fairness inspire others to stand firm and act with integrity. Tonight, our family circle feels renewed. Laughter flows freely, conversations are inclusive, and respect is palpable. My children lead interactions, their voices carry weight, and their presence is celebrated. The journey was long, filled with challenges, observation, and strategic action, but the result is profound: a family dynamic transformed by patience, advocacy, and the courage to demand fairness. As I sit quietly, I also think about the future. These lessons are not confined to tonight. They will guide my children in their own lives, teaching them the value of persistence, the importance of standing up for themselves, and the power of quiet yet firm advocacy. They will remember that dignity is earned through consistent action, that recognition can be both gentle and powerful, and that fairness is a principle worth pursuing, even when it seems impossible. I take one last look around the room, seeing the subtle gestures of respect, the smiles, and the acknowledgement that once seemed impossible. My heart feels full, not with pride alone, but with the satisfaction of knowing that my children will never again accept crumbs when they deserve the table. Tonight, we have reclaimed what was rightfully ours: dignity, respect, and recognition. For viewers, remember this: every act of advocacy, every quiet assertion of worth, and every effort to protect those who depend on you has impact. Share your stories in the comments, like this video to support the message of fairness, and subscribe to stay connected with tales of courage, persistence, and family triumph. Together, we can inspire change, promote respect, and ensure that every voice is valued. Tonight, my children are seen first, celebrated first, and heard first. The lessons of patience, advocacy, and integrity have brought us to this point. We have transformed humiliation into recognition, invisibility into respect, and injustice into fairness. Our journey is complete for now, but the principles we have embraced will guide us forever. The night ends with a quiet sense of fulfillment. My children are empowered, our family dynamic has shifted, and I feel the weight of responsibility lifted, replaced by hope, confidence, and a renewed sense of purpose. The path was not easy, but every challenge, every small victory, every act of patience has brought us here. To all viewers, I leave you with this message: fight for fairness, advocate for those who cannot always speak, and never underestimate the power of persistence and strategic action. Share your experiences in the comments, like and subscribe to be part of a community that values integrity, advocacy, and the dignity of every individual. Tonight we celebrate recognition, tomorrow we continue to uphold it. Looking back on everything that happened, I realize how much strength it took to transform humiliation into recognition, invisibility into respect, and injustice into fairness. 4 years, my children and I were forced to wait, to accept crumbs, to hide our hurt, while others claimed the spotlight and the privileges that were rightfully ours. But tonight, all of that changed. I learned that quiet observation, patient persistence, and unwavering advocacy can shift even the most rigid family dynamics. Every small victory, every subtle act of asserting our worth, built up to this moment of acknowledgement and celebration. I also understand now that protection is more than shielding my children physically. It is about creating spaces where they feel valued, heard, and empowered. This experience taught me patience, courage, and the power of standing firm for what is right. I will carry these lessons with me, ensuring my children never again feel secondary, overlooked, or silenced. Their dignity has been restored, and our bond has been strengthened beyond measure. To anyone watching, know this: being overlooked does not define your worth. Advocacy, integrity, and persistence can move mountains, even in the most challenging family situations. If you have ever fought for fairness, for your children, or for yourself, you are not alone. Stand strong, observe carefully, and act with courage. Like this video if you believe in standing up for those you love, share it with someone who needs to hear that their voice matters, subscribe to follow more stories of family triumph and resilience, and comment below to tell me your story of reclaiming dignity, advocating for your children, or turning injustice into strength. Remember, no matter how long it takes, recognition, respect, and fairness are always worth the fight. Every small act of courage builds a legacy that cannot be ignored.